is where you can reach us. Let's take you straight to our top stories this hour. The leadership of South Africa's MK Party have announced the redeployment of the Secretary-General Floyd Shivambu to Parliament. This follows a public outcry over his controversial Easter visit to fugitive pastor Shepherd Bushiri in Malawi. Bushiri and his wife fled South Africa in 2020 while out on bail, facing charges of fraud and money laundering. MK Party chairperson Nathi Nhleko had this to say on the decision.
Would like to thank and acknowledge Commander Shivambu's contribution as both the national organizer and Secretary General of the MK Party, and the role he has played in contributing to the advancement of the organization. His invaluable skills and experience as a politician will continue to benefit the MK Party in his new role to which he is deployed. The national officials have had discussions with Commander Floyd Shivambu, engaged with him pertaining to his redeployment, and he has duly accepted this particular position as directed by national leadership.
And a group of more than 100 black senior professionals in the United States have praised South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa for the manner in which he handled his meeting with President Donald Trump last month. The group also spent a year at Harvard University in the Advanced Leadership Initiative program, examining issues around income inequality, human rights and social justice in the United States and across the world. Kalihle Kumalo reports.
In a statement released by the Charles Ogletree Black Alley alumni, the association says President Cyril Ramaphosa and his team managed a potentially difficult situation with aplomb and diplomatic grace. It says Ramaphosa made an important statement at the time of global tension over the validity of diversity, equity and inclusion and the global commitment to the rule of law. The group further says the South African leader represented not only South Africa but the entire continent and painted a picture of a vibrant continent rooted in the rule of law and working for economic growth and social well-being. They stressed that Africa should continue with AGOA, with the US as a strong trading partner.
And back to the continent, the United Nations says a convoy trying to deliver food in North Darfur in Sudan has come under attack. Initial reports suggest that there have been many casualties. Famine conditions have previously been reported in Al-Fashir as 2 years of war has cut off supplies. The BBC's Simon Ponsford has the details.
The UN convoy was heading for El Fasher, the besieged regional capital of North Darfur, where there have been reports of famine conditions. The UN says it was while waiting in another town for approval to deliver the aid. The Sudanese government accused the paramilitary RSF of using drones to destroy several UN lorries. That's not been independently confirmed. El Fasher is the last city in North Darfur still controlled by the Sudanese army, which has been fighting RSF rebels for more than 2 years. The UN says at least 4 million people have now been forced to flee Sudan and calls it the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
And Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov says that key issues can only be resolved if a meeting between President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin is held at the end of this month. Umerov headed the Ukrainian delegation at the brief talks in Istanbul yesterday, where the two parties agreed on the exchanging of more prisoners. He also highlighted the importance of releasing Ukrainian children that were deported to Russia.
On release of prisoners of war, we agreed to focus on specific categories rather than numbers. We agreed to exchange all for all, seriously wounded and seriously sick prisoners of war. Second category is young soldiers who are from 18 to 25 years old, all for all. Also, we agreed to return 6,000 to 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. We have provided the other side with a list of several hundred Ukrainian children who were deported to Russia.
And 200 prisoners have escaped in Pakistan after an overnight earthquake rocked their jail. Police say they've recaptured nearly 90 escapees from Malgir jail in Sindh province, with one inmate dying during the operation. The BBC's Azadeh Moshiri has more.
As prisoners felt tremors shake the walls around them, they began shouting from their cells, according to police. A superintendent told the BBC the inmates were terrified the building would collapse on top of them. The frenzy turned violent, with thousands of prisoners breaking down their doors and shattering windows. Many used the opportunity to escape, and dozens are still on the run. Police are going door to door visiting past residences to arrest them. Malgir Jail is Sindh province's second largest prison and is over capacity.
And finally, an Australian woman accused of murdering 3 of her children, or rather her relatives, and of attempting to kill a 4th at a lunch where she served poisonous mushrooms, has been given evidence at her trial. Erin Peterson told the court that she enjoyed the taste of exotic mushrooms. The BBC's Katie Watson reports from Morwell in Victoria State.
This is the first full day of evidence for Erin Patterson. She told the court of various medical issues and that she had never had ovarian cancer, despite allegedly asking her relatives for lunch to discuss the diagnosis. Erin Patterson said she had a huge mistrust of the health system after incidents involving her children, explaining why she discharged herself from hospital after the lunch, even though doctors were concerned she'd been poisoned herself. She became emotional when talking about Don and Gail Patterson, her in-laws who died within days of being served a beef Wellington containing death cap mushrooms. She repeatedly told the court how much she cared for them.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
Just about 10 minutes past 9. A reminder that you can get in touch with us on the socials at X. We are on Channel Africa 1. Same is true for Instagram, TikTok and YouTube, where you can stream live. You can reach out to us on Facebook on simply Channel Africa. Now, the former DRC President Joseph Kabila has met with women's and youth associations to discuss efforts to restore peace across the country. During the meeting, Kabila expressed his commitment to re-establishing stability for the Congolese people and bringing an end to the ongoing conflicts, particularly in the eastern regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The association pledged their support and participation in the pursuit of lasting peace. Channel Africa's Jimmy Shukrani Bakomera reports from Goma.
While in Goma, North Kivu province, former President Joseph Kabila Kabange met with the women leaders of Goma to discuss with them about the political situation in the whole country, DRC. During their discussions, they shared with him the primary goal, the restoration of peace in the North Kivu province, part of which has been occupied by the M23 rebels for approximately 6 months. These women also expressed their desire to be fully involved in all efforts and initiatives aimed at restoring peace in the region, stressing the urgency of putting an end to this conflict, which is paralyzing the lives of our family. The representative of women mediators and ambassador for peace in the Ruchuru territory, Liberata Rubumba Buratwa, member of the delegation which met Joseph Kabila, asked the former president to use his experience in order to restore everlasting peace in the eastern of the Democratic Republic of Congo. As part of his consultation, Joseph Kabila Kabange received the Goma Youth Association. There was a single topic on the agenda: talk about the peace. President Kabila retired that Congolese youth have a decisive role to play in preventing the fragmentation of the country and to struggle against insecurity and bad politics, which has been reconstructed by the government of Kinshasa. Faced with multiple pressures, he invited them to make a courageous and responsible choice for the sake, history and posterity. Addressing the youth, he asked them to reject exploitation and to be the builders of a real peace based on the unity, truth and solidarity. The end of the discussion, the young people expressed their desire to be more involved in the process of finding solution, affirming their willingness to actively contribute to the reconstruction of the country. The president welcomed his awareness and reaffirmed his willingness to support a youth who is aware, engaged and urgent of changement. Until now, the Tshisekedi regime continues to blame former President Joseph Kabila for being a great founder of the AFC M23 rebels, which according to Kinshasa causes insecurity in the eastern part of the country, calling him a collaborator and leader of this political and military movement. For his part, former President Joseph Kabila also judged the Kinshasa government for sowing terror among civilians and prioritizing injustice and the dictatorship in the DRC. Reporting from Goma, Jimmy Shukran Bakomera, Channel Africa News.
And at 13 minutes past 9, we take a look at another conflict that's been long running. This time we talk about South Sudan's economy. It's in crisis and the war in Sudan is making it worse. Oil exports are under threat. Major investors have pulled out and international loans are drying up. But the full story isn't just about war. It's also about internal dysfunction. Joining us to explain what's really happening is Jan Pospisil, an expert on Sudan and South Sudan, as well as Associate Professor at the Center for Peace and Security at Coventry University. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's just first start with what is happening in South Sudan and the Sudan, as you say, that it's quite a nuanced, dynamic situation. Let's just start with the context.
Well, yeah, the context is at the moment that there has been a political crisis in South Sudan that has aggravated over the last couple of months. It had started with fights in Upper Nile, in a region in north of the country, and from there it had developed from the clashes there, which were actually armed clashes between a community militia and the national army. From there, it had developed into a political crisis whereby then the first vice president, Riek Machar, so the leader of the opposition, that signed a peace agreement in 2018, has been detained and put into house arrest for allegedly being behind this fighting, which is a doubtful claim, but nevertheless, he is now in house arrest, under house arrest for at least 2 months now. Since then, the crisis never really resolved. So there is the internal dispute is there, and the formal transition linked to the peace process is at the moment at the brink of collapse.
And South Sudan, being landlocked itself, has relied on the Sudan for its oil transportation and the pipeline. So just talk to us a little bit more about the impact of the war in Sudan, particularly the drones hitting off Port Sudan, and how that's impacted on the supply of oil to South Sudan.
Perhaps it's necessary to have a brief look at the history when Sudan and then the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, which was the main or is like the main liberation force in the south, signed their peace agreement in 2005 that led then to the split of South Sudan. It resulted in most of the oil wells being in the south, but the only pipeline that would bring the oil that is produced there to the international market goes through the north and to Port Sudan. So of course at the moment, like it was always like a contested thing, and this went up, down, and it always along the contested relationship between South Sudan and Sudan. But at the moment the war in Sudan broke out a bit more than 2 years ago, this of course became an immediate threat to the oil exports of South Sudan to the north. We had a pipeline closure first in 2024, beginning of the year, for several months. It wasn't possible for South Sudan to export oil through the north because the territory was partly controlled then by the armed militia fighting against the Sudanese army, the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. And now again, there was clashes between the Sudanese army and the RSF that threatened the oil flowing through the pipeline and the pipeline from producing. We have to take into account actually this pipeline, like having a pipeline up is not so easy. There's 5 pumping stations. These pumping stations need fuel to heat up the oil. There needs to be chemicals induced. So there is a logistic around the pipeline that is incredibly difficult to keep up once there is a war going on. And what happened then over the last couple of weeks was after the Sudanese army actually took back Khartoum, the old capital, from the Rapid Support Forces, they in turn answered with drone attacks on Port Sudan, where there is the oil terminals on the one hand, but also on power plants across the country. And these attacks on the power plants resulted in severe issues that threatened the power supply to these pumping stations. And this led Sudan to declare again an emergency without their control, force majeure, and the threat to again shut the pipeline down, which apparently now is off the table, but still a quite significant danger to the oil exports that South Sudan is having.
And you yourself have said that this is a complex conflict of both countries, South Sudan obviously having becoming independent from the north. So just looking at what this means, if the IMF is warning that the economy of South Sudan is near collapse, given the fact that 80% of South Sudan's budget does come from oil revenue and 90% of its fiscal revenue from that, does that not also automatically mean that the North will also be impacted in one way or the other?
Well, here we have to take into account that these numbers are numbers from the heydays of South Sudanese oil production right after independence, when the oil production was at the level of even at one point 500,000 barrels a day. But even before the Sudanese war started and there was the first pipeline shut down, there was already a decline of oil production to a level of about 130,000 barrels a day. And even the oil that had been produced was of minor quality, so was far off a very good international quality. So the price that it could get for this oil was not so high. So these numbers go back to a situation when actually the oil was really flowing. But even South Sudan itself in the current budget now acknowledges that actually it's far off of 80% of the government revenue they would wish so. And they are at the moment claiming that even under ideal circumstances, the oil revenue would account for 50%, so half of the government revenue, with taxes and other customs and other kind of income being the other half. But even this government revenue would only account of a quarter, 25% of the actual planned expenses. So the budget deficit is enormous, and the actual contribution of oil revenue to this to cover this budget deficit is quite minor, and perhaps at 15 to 20%.
So I'm just going to look at the 2024-2025 budget. It seems to suggest that South Sudan is becoming increasingly more reliant on non-oil revenues. Is this the reason for it, the situation that we're discussing right now? And if we could just also talk about the restructuring that it did with Petronas and Nalpet, the logistics around that, how much of a picture does it play in how it's reconfigured its budgeting?
Yeah, I mean, it's two interesting questions here. I mean, first of all, Petronas, the Malaysian national oil company, was a major actor in the within the free oil producing consortia in South Sudan. They decided to leave the country, not necessarily because of the situation there, but because of a change in company strategy, going away from oil production more into like sustainable energies and these things. And when they left South Sudan, they could not agree on a joint selling of the Petronas shares to another company. There was debates about a Nigerian-British company called Savannah taking over these shares. The government prevented this actively for political reasons, as we understand, which led to a huge lawsuit that is currently ongoing, where Petronas requests a healthy sum of millions from the government because of this selling of their shares falling through. At the same time, the government had then issues even to, like after they nationalized effectively these shares that Petronas held, of even having logistics up in the oil field and getting the production up to a level that was there when Petronas was there, and they really struggled and couldn't do that. So the interesting question is now why this year's budget for the first time even works with such a huge deficit and has these oil revenues for the first time actually at that low level, which is closer to reality than ever before. This is a valid question to ask, especially when you go historically through South Sudanese budgets, and given also the high level of corruption there, this budget is basically kind of numbers that are pretty random. So what is it that South Sudan wants to tell the international community and the international public with this budget? And it is essentially, in my view, that they desperately need international loans coming in, and they signal very clearly by budgeting this high deficit that is totally unsustainable, that the South Sudanese kind of state finances are on the verge of breaking down without international loans coming in. And I think communicating this is what is currently going on with the current budget.
And we mentioned earlier on, as we were introducing the interview, that funders are pulling out, but also investors, because of their investments being targeted as well. So how would South Sudan get out of this quagmire in order to be able to boost confidence that it can attract loans and it can, pay them back?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the oil revenue is one proof in a way that South Sudan could pay back loans. And with the oil revenue stopping, of course, it's very difficult to make a claim to get commercial loans even from the Gulf. But for these commercial loans, as well as for development loans coming from agencies like the African Development Bank or IMF, the first thing that South Sudan has to prove that it tackles seriously the enormous levels of corruption. We have to take into account that in the current corruption perception index, South Sudan is number 180. So it's in this ranking, the most corrupt country on the whole planet. So, of course, who goes in, invests money in businesses, or even gives loan to a country where it's pretty clear that the state is de facto a kleptocratic machine just to take money away and transferring this money into private pockets? And it doesn't help that one of the spearheads, the personal spearheads of this corruption machine, a gentleman called Benjamin Bolmel, who is sanctioned by the United States at the moment based on the Global Magnitsky Act for corruption in the US, he has now been promoted to vice president and also to the deputy chairman of the of SPLM by President Salva Kiir. So what is the signal that comes from such a move to international investors, but also to multilateral agencies that might be willing to give loans, and that instead of tackling this corruption, the actual actors, the spearheads of this corruption, are promoted to the most important positions in government?
And just when you talk about corruption, and we again go back to the issue of oil revenues, I want to understand the relationship to the South Sudanese budget. I mean, you spoke about corruption. One of the things that has been pointed out is the structural role that NALPET plays along the lines of the currency circulation, which is as dubious. So if we're talking about the reliance on the political structures in place, there is obviously what the government feeds to investors and what investors see. You speak about perception, but what is the actual reality on the ground?
Well, the actual reality on the ground is at the moment the worst economic crisis that South Sudan faces after independence, which is mainly due that there's just no hard currency anymore in circulation. we have to take into account that actually the production in the country of whatever kind of goods is very low. And even if, for instance, grain or other agricultural products are produced, the transport within the country is almost impossible due to a very bad road infrastructure and a very bad security situation along the roads that prevent, for instance, even agricultural products from the Equatorius come to Juba, and even that this is a distance of 200 kilometers that they are not able to bridge because of the bad situation on the roads over land. So everything has to be basically imported. It has to be imported from Uganda, from Kenya in the south, and in the northern countries now with the war in Sudan, a lot of goods coming from Ethiopia, and this is very expensive. So here, a lot of hard currency leaves the country. At the same time, the actual individuals engaged in corruption are incredibly greedy. We have to take corruption as a social phenomenon, I guess, and corruption also has some societal functions, and it's not necessarily destroying an economy at the moment that this money gets reinvested. But what we see in South Sudan is that the money that is taken out, especially now from tax revenues, and there is indications that this money goes directly to the family of the president, that this money gets taken out and moves to neighboring countries or even to the Gulf, and went into a private ventures there. So basically, all hard currency goes out. It leads to enormous inflation. We have seen it's difficult to say in percentage points, but over the last year, a dollar changed from about 1,000 SSP, South Sudanese pounds, to in the end almost 6,000 SSP over the course of a year. This is crazy, and only shows how difficult it is to survive on the ground without any hard currency being in circulation.
We thank you so much for your time and insights. Really appreciated speaking to us on the latest on South Sudan, the war in Sudan, and how it's complicating just the general economic prospects of its southern neighbor. Jan Pospisil is an expert on Sudan and South Sudan, associate professor at the Center for Peace and Security at Coventry University.
Africa at Play with NATO and ETO chairman.
The Confederation of African Athletics CAA President Mr. Hamad Kalkaba Malboum talk to us about the state of athletics in Africa as it stands, and what picture are you looking at 5 years later?
Yeah, athletics in Africa is strong. We are able to organize our major events in time. Like this year, we will have the under-20 and under-18 African Championship in Nigeria. Next year, we will have the senior in Ghana. In 2027, we will go back to Algeria to organize the under-18 and under-20. And then 2028, we will have the senior championship in Gaborone in Botswana. Well, by this program, we can increase our performance. And at the same time, we are considering the fact that within the British Federation, they are identifying young talent every year within the national program, within the scholarship championship. And so the athletics in Africa is in good standard.
Live every Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Central African Time.
Zilipendwa na Abedi Jean de la Croix.
Mara ya kwanza kabisa uliingia studio ulikuwa ni mwaka gani?
Ya, nakumbuka mara kwanza nimeingia studio hapa South Africa.
Vizuri sana.
Ilikuwa ni mwaka wa 2016-17 kama sisahau.
Swali kidogo la kizushi hivi hapo Durban watu wanafahamu kama wewe ni mwanamuziki?
Ya, hapa Durban watu wengi wananifahamu kwamba mimi ni msanii ambaye anafanya vyema kwenye mambo ya muziki.
Okay, vizuri sana. Hongera sana kwa hilo. Naam, tuzungumzie sasa albamu yako ambayo unapanga kuitoa hivi karibuni. Albamu unatoa lini?
Yeah, albamu itakuwa available, itakuwa tayari next week Saturday, itakuwa tayari.
Albamu inaenda na ngoma ngapi?
Albamu inaenda na miziki 17.
Zilipendwa kila Jumamosi kuanzia saa 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati hadi saa 1 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Sepiso Makwethu. Channel Africa.
28 minutes to 10. We continue with Africa World Hour as we take a look at developments around the continent and the world. This time we take you to what's happening in the Middle East as tensions escalate across the region. Recent Israeli airstrikes on Yemen's Sana'a International Airport have drawn sharp criticism from rights groups. Human Rights International Watch has labelled the attacks potentially unlawful and called for investigations into both Israeli and Houthi actions. We speak to Ahmed Bechesri, who is Paris-based Advocacy and Communications Director at Human Rights Watch, to better understand what is exactly happening and what are the legal and humanitarian implications. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, and I hope I pronounce your surname somewhat correctly.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So let's just talk about these latest Israeli airstrikes, exactly what has happened and the manner in which you say it is either unlawful or whether it is potentially unlawful. Why is it potentially unlawful?
Well, because under international law, a military strike cannot be deliberate, it cannot be indiscriminate, and it cannot be disproportionate against civilians and civilian objects. An attack is called indiscriminate when it doesn't, differentiate between a military and a civilian target, when it's not directed at a specific military objective. And it's called disproportionate if the expected loss of civilian life is excessive compared to the military gain. Now, Israel claimed that the airport was used by the Houthis to transfer weapons and operatives, meaning for military activity. But the problem is we found no evidence supporting this claim, and Israel provided to fail any evidence of that claim. So yes, they said that it was a military target, but it's not enough to say it. You have to prove it, and they didn't.
And as you say, it's not enough to say it, but to prove it. But and I say this without bias, but what's been happening in Gaza, Israel has used that excuse of having quote unquote evidence of Hamas militants occupying certain spaces that are really civilian spaces, whether we talk about schools, hospitals, etc. So in this case, before it struck the military base, was there any evidence that there were Yemeni citizens within this airport?
Well, again, we couldn't find any. And we examined the zone, including through examining satellite imagery. We didn't find any evidence. That's why we stated that those airstrikes are apparently unlawful and should be investigated as war crimes. Because, again, they are apparently indiscriminate and disproportionate against civilian infrastructure. We didn't find any evidence of military activity. What we found, however, was that those attacks destroyed all the commercial passenger aircraft operating from that airport, including 4 airplanes from Yemenia Airlines, which is a civilian airline. It's the only commercial airline actually serving that airport. And by destroying those planes and damaging the airport severely, the Israeli attacks have cut off access for civilian needing medical care, and they blocked the entry of humanitarian aid. So the military target, we haven't found any, but the civilian damage, it is very much established.
And is this a retaliatory strike to the Houthis' alleged attack on Ben Gurion Airport?
Well, I mean, we don't know. They said that there was a military objective. But again, let us be very clear. When the Houthis launched also attacks on Ben Gurion Airport, they also seemed indiscriminate. And that's why we also said that these same attacks should likewise be investigated as potential war crimes. However, one of the core principles of the laws of war is that it's not because a violation is committed by one side that you can answer it by a violation committed on the other side. The Houthi attacks on Ben Gurion Airport may very well be indiscriminate. That is not a reason, not an excuse, not a justification for the Israelis to do the same in Yemeni airports.
And I ask this just in the case of understanding that it seems like all bets are off in the Middle East conflict, particularly in the region where it seems that there is a justification for every move that it's made. If we look at what's happening with regards to food aid at the moment, that those who are lining up to receive aid are actually being shot at. I'd like to hear what Human Rights Watch's perspective is. What's going on in the Middle East at the moment and international law being flouted?
It is very clear and very simple. Cutting aid is unlawful. It is a major violation of the laws of war. Nothing justifies cutting food and water and medicine and vital supplies for 2 million civilians, which is what Israel has been doing for almost 2 months now. Starvation as a means of war is a war crime. I mean, we have documented several war crimes committed by the Israeli army and crimes against humanity and even acts of genocide. That is what's going on. And the siege is continuing. It is of the utmost urgency that the Israeli government and the Israeli army must open the gates for much needed humanitarian aid. There are children and women and civilians, dying of hunger and of preventable diseases out there just because they are blocking all the ways for humanitarian aid to enter. This is a major war crime. It has to stop, and all the nations of the world must pressure Israel as much as they can, including by stopping any arms sales and any military assistance, but also every possible type of pressure possible to compel Israel to do what it is supposed to do, what it is obligated to do under international law.
And Israel obviously has consistently said that it's because it is defending its own citizenry, it's defending its territory, and this has been something of great contention within the United Nations. One of its military spokespeople say, for instance, they did publish a warning on X, and as a result, a United Nations flight scheduled to land at Sana'a airport was cancelled. So is your understanding that Israel is saying it's taking all the precautions that it can to avoid civilian casualties?
No, warning is not enough. I mean, it's good to send a warning when there are civilians out there, but it's clearly not enough. The attack still has to be legitimate, and for that, proof must be provided that there were military targets there and that the attacks was making a clear distinction between those military targets and the civilian targets. Warning is the icing on the cake, if you allow me that expression. It cannot by itself make an attack legitimate and lawful.
We spoke about what's been happening over the past 2 months. What have been the casualties, not only in Yemen, not only in Gaza, but in surrounding areas, civilians who have been affected and afflicted as a result of the airstrikes and bombardments by Israel?
I mean, what can I say? Israel committed pretty much all the international war crimes that there are in the book. They have starved an entire population. They have cut water supply deliberately, and we documented that as clearly acts of genocide. And yes, I am using this word because when you cut water, which is a matter of life or death, to a whole civilian population, pretending that you are pursuing military goals for that, it is unlawful. It is a major violation of the laws of war. So they have committed war crimes by targeting civilians indistinctively and without any regard for proportionality. They have massively displaced the population of Gaza. 2 million people, almost all of them have been displaced not once or twice, but several times. This is a crime against humanity. So displacement, starvation, bombardment without any military target. I mean, you name it. Ethnic cleansing has been committed by Israel. This is the sad and very scary reality that is happening in Gaza right now. And again, we call all the countries of the world to pressure Israel as much as they can using all the means available, starting by cutting all arms supplies and military assistance, because there is complicity in those grave crimes if they continue providing weapons to this state and this government that is committing continuous war crimes one after the other.
Ahmed, thank you so much for speaking to us from Human Rights Watch. Ahmed Ben Chepsi, he is the Advocacy and Communications Director there at Human Rights Watch, speaking to us live from Paris.
África. Conhece o Ntivani?
Claro que sou eu.
Ntivani é o amante da música de corpo e alma.
Eu amo a música africana.
Ele aprecia todos os tipos de melodias e passa os seus dias a ouvir a Channel África.
Ok.
Adivinha só, a Channel África quer ajudar o Ntivani e os amantes da música em todo o lado a descobrir ainda mais música incrível. Por isso, a Channel África está a convocar artistas africanos a submeterem as suas músicas. Músicos, lembrem-se de nos dar todas as informações relevantes no music@channelafrica.co.za. As submissões são a vossa oportunidade de ser ouvidos, mas não garantem inclusão na lista. Todas as submissões serão cuidadosamente analisadas para verificar se cumprem os requisitos da nossa estação. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Africa at Play with Neto and ETO Chairman.
The Confederation of African Athletics, CAA President Mr. Hamad Kalkaba Malboum, talk to us about the state of athletics in Africa as it stands, and what picture are you looking at 5 years later?
Yeah, athletics in Africa is strong. We are able to organize our major events in time. Like this year, we will have the under-20 and under-18 African Championship in Nigeria. Next year, we will have the senior in Ghana. In 2027, we will go back to Algeria to organize the under-18 and under-20. And then 2028, we will have the senior championship in Gaborone in Botswana. Well, by this program, we can increase our performance. And at the same time, we are considering the fact that within the British Federation, they are identifying young talent every year within their national program, within the scholarship championship. And so the athletics in Africa is in good standard.
Live every Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Central African Time. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And you are listening to Channel Africa, the African Perspective, Africa World Hour, as we say, from the heart of Africa to all the corners of the world. One voice, many voices, different perspectives, and as we say, the voices that matter, and you are that voice that matters. So please let us know wherever you are, what you're doing, what are the views, the perspectives that are impacting, influencing your world. Do write into us. We are on the socials. You can even send us WhatsApp voice notes 0634069126. I am indeed Tsepiso Makwetla. We continue one of my favorite features of the show is what we do around about this time, 21:40. We try and mix it up, have something interesting, something educational, something that maybe you have never heard of before, you've discussed, and I thought this one was a good pick. I saw that this Saturday, the 7th of June, the Fighter Gallery at the University of Johannesburg is launching a powerful new exhibition focusing 2 solo shows presented in tandem. One is called Waiting and Remembering by Senzeni Makhasela and Xenopolis by Heinrich Neumann. It's curated by Dr. Farida Nazir. The exhibition offers a striking exploration of Johannesburg through themes of memory, identity, urban life and displacement, placing 2 distinct artistic voices in dialogue with the city and each other. Joining us now to talk about the thinking behind it and what the audiences can expect, the curator herself, Dr. Farida Nazir. A very good evening to you, Dr. Nazir. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I really thought this was compelling stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. I think that both the artists are really incredible at what they do, and it's vastly different, the medium or media that they use in order to articulate their stories or narrations. And both artists have created works that respond directly to their personal experiences of Johannesburg, and they tell these stories through, in Senzeni's case, drawings, textiles, various other kind of object work, as well as wall artworks, so artworks that they hang on the walls. And then Heinrich through e-waste and videography. So e-waste, of course, is the leftover or the waste product that comes from our computers and so forth. And he'll be setting up an installation that depicts or illustrates the city through this waste product. Obviously, then looking at the symbolic meaning of this idea of waste and dystopia and so forth. And the videos are very, very interesting. Shows also how kind of alien-esque creatures traverse the city. So I'm giving hints. I'm not giving everything away because we'd like for you to
experience it yourself.
Absolutely, it's one of those shows that you definitely, in terms of what the way in which you experience it, it needs to be in person. Some shows you're able to translate onto, the digital formats. This one you have to see in person. Yeah.
And both artists have international exposure and acclaim, having been resident, I understand, in different cities around the world. So their choice of examining Johannesburg as one of the world's most famous cities through, spaces and identity. Can you just speak a little bit more about I know you've said what they're both exhibiting, but how they came about, how they are doing it the way that they're doing it.
Yeah, so Senzeni is a Tokoza baby, so she is rooted very much in here with us. She's experienced it in many different ways. Although she is an international artist and have traveled with this work on a number of occasions and shown in different places, I think that what's very, very important always is for artists to show their work at home. And this is why I started with the idea that we are rooted as South African artists here. So our very first experiences, our cultural capital, and our visual languages are rooted here. So speaking as an artist myself, I feel that as much as I exhibit and I kind of speak of how my experiences in the rest of the world is, kind of relevant to me and how it resonates with me, it always comes from the perspective of the places that I call home. So I think that it's the same for Senzeni and for Heinrich. Senzeni's work has for a very long time been situated here. She has worked with the Waiting for Gebane project for many, many years, and now the project is still developing and still moving us in different ways, telling the story of her alter ego, Theodora, who comes to look for her husband in the city.
And let me just lock in on that. So she speaks of it as a journey of erasure, isolation, and threat. And while asking you not give too much, but enough enticement so that people can understand the framing of the conversation, especially through her alter ego.
Yeah, so of course in South Africa we have a very complex colonialism, apartheid, and there's also then the continuities and the consequences of those two very, very long and violent eras. Johannesburg in particular is the city of gold for some, and for others not so much. It's a mining space, and of course people migrate from different parts of South Africa, different parts of the world to come seek their fortune here. There's of course like a much deeper narrative involved, but and that I think you'll be able to experience through the work itself. But when we're thinking about someone who's moved to the city to provide for their family and then disappears and stops communicating, one puts oneself into the shoes of the family of that person and what they must be experiencing. So Theodora is looking for Gebani, and moves around the city. This idea of invisibility, of course, if you're familiar with the work, many people will know that Theodora has a particular way of dressing, and it's a specific type of rural Black woman's dress. And over the years, Senzeni has produced and collected so many of the same dress, because that is what Senzeni wore every single day in this performance of Theodora. And Theodora went so many different places that she didn't belong, simple places that we would think is quite mundane, such as shopping malls, such as parties, and wandering the streets, and literally being very visible, so hyper visible through this costume, but also being ignored. So invisibility in that way, which is very much kind of a constructed type of visibility. Yeah.
And I'm just actually thinking about it visually, how striking the juxtaposition must be, viewing places and spaces from a Black womanist theory or experience to when you see Newman's own view of the spaces he occupies, not only nature, which is something that is not seen as Black people to enjoy, but also if you talk about technology and a built environment that is for a white male, for instance.
Yeah, so I think for me, what was quite interesting about these two, quite similar but distinct approaches to the city is that, of course, we're dealing with people who are very different and who has had very different experiences of the city, but also other cities. So the same applies to Heinrich, that he has also traveled quite a bit as an artist and has extracted what is similar in all of these cities, and he's done so quite beautifully through his video works. As a white male, if you understand the history of Johannesburg and how it transformed from being this central business district, which was predominantly occupied by white bodies, white people during apartheid, like in the 70s in particular, there was such a big shift that happened and a turnaround in the city where then it is a central business district, and now is predominantly occupied by Black people or Black bodies. So that shift between, and the displacement that happens when the shift occurred is a very interesting one. And I think Heinrich explores that quite beautifully in terms of this idea of feeling out of place. And again, the same type of isolation that Senzeni experiences, this is where we have some parity in terms of the narratives. So I think, again, so as we're installing the show and getting ready for Saturday, it's becoming more and more apparent how these two shows work together. And of course, you can only imagine it based on what on images and so forth. So it really isn't the same. You have to be in the space.
So just for you as the curator, and we've spoken about the two different experiences. I was actually just thinking about it when you talk about Newman, the fact that he relocated to Cape Town with his family. We just recently did an interview with Ghana's former ambassador to South Africa, where he's written an article about the tale of two cities, which is Johannesburg and Cape Town. And if we talk about memory work and South Africa through the prism of, say, You're Born Free, it's a whole different project, isn't it? So if you look at your exhibition and these two juxtaposing artworks, artists and what you're trying to put across, what would you say to them is not only the value, but what will be so compelling that it'll help people to understand these narratives from a prism that is probably more compelling than they think?
Yeah. I think, for a very long time in South Africa, there's been, and this is why I am specifically drawn to memory work, because it's about how we see the world in a particular time, and it draws on our history and our heritage and so forth. And of course, we've inherited this history that, like I said in the beginning, is quite troubling, very troubling and very violent. And today we see the consequences of that. So nobody is free of the history that we have, not in any country for that matter. But in particular here, it's still very visible in the landscape, it's visible in the cityscape, it's visible in what we have access to, in how we treat each other, and so forth. So for that reason, I think that it's relevant to everyone. I think a lot of people will be able to resonate with the experiences directly, because they are so, I think they are so real in terms of how we traverse and navigate this, like life in Johannesburg, but also life in the world these days, because things are so precarious. So I think that for the reason that we are all really made up of our history, whether we want to be dealing with it or not, we are composed of what our ancestry is, of what occurred politically and sociologically. So it really is important as an educational project as well for people to understand that, so that they can more deeply understand where they are right now and where they're going to.
Farida,
so I think...
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Certainly, I'm hoping... by the way, just very quickly, the exhibition, is it just this Saturday, or is it going to go on for a lot longer?
It's going on until the 22nd of June. So it's a couple of weeks, and then we will have some programming, panel discussions, walkabouts, and so forth on various dates. And of course, you are able to see that on the Prada Gallery social media.
Farida Nazir, a real pleasure. Thank you very much speaking to us about her upcoming In Tandem exhibition, Waiting and Remembering by Senzeni Makhasela and Xenopolis by Heinrich Newman, taking place at the Prada Gallery at the University of Johannesburg. So as she mentioned, it's about urbanization, it's about identity, it's about a whole lot of other interesting tidbits. And that brings us to the end of Africa World Hour. But before we end, let's check in with Shayla Ndukumana to find out what's coming up Hot Eyes this evening.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Listen, Youth Month. So we are celebrating the youth. There is an upcoming award, the top 16 youth-owned brands. We're going to be finding out how these bright young minds are changing the landscape of entrepreneurship in South Africa. Then we're going to be talking about traveling in the winter. Right? Something that a lot of people are afraid of doing, but lest I say that Limpopo is the place to be, okay? Because they have 2 summers, technically speaking. And so we're going to be looking at their winter campaign for travel, just to attract more tourists, but also to increase domestic travels, because that's something we're looking to push.
Listen, winter travel for people who are non-South African in South Africa is an absolute joy. It's like you're just going to another tropical, destination. And Limpopo, Mpumalanga, those are the places to be during winter, to be quite honest. Shayla, thank you very much. Shayla Ndukumana up next with Hotlines. It is minute past 10. That's it for Africa World Hour. Thanks for joining us. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing and listening here on Channel Africa.
Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives about love after dark with Shayla Ndukumana.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 to